Hello, I'm Amanda Moore. I'm the director of the Clearinghouse Community. Welcome to the Advocacy Exchange for January 2017. The Advocacy Exchange is our monthly live conversation with advocates advancing change. And both the Clearinghouse Community and the Advocacy Exchange are brought to you by the Sargent Shriver National Center on Poverty Law, a national leader in advancing justice and opportunity. Today, I'm happy to be joined by three of my colleagues at the Shriver Center. Joining us from Chicago, we have Shriver Center President John Bouman, and we also have Andrew Hammond, who's a Skadden Fellow at the Shriver Center. Hello, John and Andrew.
Hello. Hi.
And joining us from our West Coast flank, we have a Shriver Center Housing Justice Staff Attorney, Claire Tran-Leung. Hi, Claire.
Hi, everyone.
And I am in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So with input from their colleagues at the Shriver Center on their fellow advocates there, John and Andrew and Claire wrote our current Clearinghouse article, which is called Now What? Poverty Fighting Ideas for Another New Administration. You can find a copy of that article on the Clearinghouse Community site. That's at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. And we're going to talk about some of the ideas in that article today. As you all know, we're now in the Trump administration, and we're going to talk about what an anti-poverty and racial justice agenda looks like at this point in time. But before we start talking, I want to let you know how you can be part of this conversation. We would love to hear from you with questions or comments. Most of you are watching this live stream through YouTube Live. We're happy to have you. If you'll notice, if you're on a desktop to the right of the screen, you should see a live chat box. And there you can send us your questions or your comments. If you want to go ahead and give it a shot, try it out, please do. You can just give us your name and where you're watching. If you're watching this on YouTube on a mobile device, the live chat is found at the bottom of your screen. We'd love to hear from you. But if live chat is not your thing, you can still use good old-fashioned email. You can email me while we're talking. I'll be monitoring my account to see your messages and your questions. My email address is Amanda Moore, M-O-O-R-E, at povertylaw.org. Now, everyone who registered for today's conversation will receive a follow-up email within the next couple of days. And in that email, you will find a link to watch a recording of today's video, along with a link to access the article that we'll be talking about on the Clearinghouse site. And there'll also be a link for you to register for next month's Advocacy Exchange conversation. All right, housekeeping matters aside, let's get to why we are here. So as you all know, last Friday, the presidential office changed hands from Barack Obama to Donald Trump. So 8 years ago, when Obama took office, the Clearinghouse Review published a special issue. And that issue was devoted to laying out an anti-poverty agenda for the new administration. And a key piece of that issue was an article written by John Bouman that laid out a 12-point anti-poverty agenda. So on this occasion, when we have seen the executive office change hands, John and Andrew and Claire, with input from their colleagues, revisited that agenda. And they assessed how the Obama administration either met or didn't meet those points. And then they took a look at it and revised it to update it to our current situation. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So John, I'll start with you, and I'm just going to ask the broad question for this. Why do this?
Well, I think, it changes with the context. So in 2008, it sort of felt more like, here's a list of helpful suggestions. And that's a good reason to do this, to lay out the broad range of issues that have an impact on poverty. And sometimes people need to be reminded that it cuts across that many different issues. But also to provide, a list of suggested actions that a new administration could take, one that meant to be active in the fight against poverty. But it's also for us. It's for us and for our allies and for people who do this work to remind us about the breadth of the issues involved in fighting poverty, and particularly at a moment when we're looking at what might be a difficult time for people in poverty, to keep a positive narrative out there, to keep out there not just some sort of attempt to predict what a Trump administration and the new Congress might do, but to keep in front of us what they should do, and to remind us that we should be working on a proactive set of things in addition to playing defense.
Yeah, I mean,
right, Claire?
Oh, I just think I was just going to add on to what John said. I mean, I think there is a danger of us sort of focusing too much on the defense work, and I think remembering, you know, that the work that that there's progress made under the Obama administration, but even that work took a lot of effort and time, and it wasn't like things just happened overnight. And so I think having taking some time to reassess what happened in the Obama administration, to sort of just take stock of everything is really important. And then making sure that we remember that even though there might be a lot of things that are coming down that are negative, we really, this is sort of part of the ongoing fight to end poverty.
Thank you. Those are both important points. I want to say hello to some people who have joined us. We have Jillian in San Francisco, and Daniel in Chicago, and Victoria in Albany, New York. So thank you for joining us. And I'll remind everyone, we'd love to hear from you with your questions, either through the live chat on YouTube, or you can email me at amandamoore, M-O-O-R-E, @povertylaw.org. You stress in your article the importance of the civil legal aid and the equal justice community at this point in time. Marie-Claire, can you say a bit about why that's an important role for us right now?
Well, I think definitely the legal aid and equal justice community are at the front line. They are the ones who are seeing a lot of problems come in through the door, and so they're also the problem solvers. They're the people that that everyday people reach out to. And so I think in this time where building community and relating to everyday people is really important, we really need to, that community is going to be important for helping to move progress forward. And, you know, looking at some of the work that we did, like on criminal records and housing, we had a lot of great work that happened under the HUD administration when they recognized that reentry is an issue that people face, especially in terms of housing. And they did a lot of really great guidances to help move that issue forward. But at the end of the day, what comes down, where we really have progress is how that trickles down to the communities and to the ground. And I think legal aid is really important because they're the ones who are going to see those problems come in and deal with the individual cases, and then really help people.
An important part of the response, I think, to what we get from Washington in the coming years, it is about individual rights. Some of the most troubling threats involve, you know, certain basic rights that people have under the civil rights laws and otherwise. And it also involves enforcing on an individual basis the new remedies that have been carved out under the Violence Against Women Act, under the HUD guidances that you referenced, Marie-Claire. Those things aren't self-executing. And in fact, they can be damaged if we're not vigilant about enforcing them. And those are individual cases. And so I would urge handling these cases, understand that they're part of a national response. That there's in many of these areas, like in the HUD use of criminal records guidance, that overuse of criminal records can violate the civil rights laws. There's a litigation strategy that's been developed around that to be used in individual cases, but also to be coordinated across the country. So make sure that you're plugged into those kinds of efforts, and that when you do win something, that you report it out. Have Amanda put it in clearinghouse community, or that our friends in the relevant subject matter backup centers back up these things, keep track of dockets and so on, that they're aware of when there's victories, so we can build off of each other's momentum.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the article the article.
Andrew, I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Sorry, one way to read the article is to think about it as a set of investments, giving people the opportunities they need to work, to invest in their kids, to take care of their loved ones. But as John said, it's really about creating a kind of a zone of non-interference for all Americans. But we and legal aid lawyers think that poor Americans should also have that kind of, to be free of government discrimination, private predation. And unfortunately, I think we're concerned that in this new administration, the federal government's not going to be lining up with the legal aid community to redress some of those grievances. It could be, either blind eye to practices or predatory practices, or perpetuate, being the perpetrator themselves. And so it's really going to be up to the legal aid community in coalition with activists and everyday Americans really to, hold the federal government to account, to act as private attorneys general on some of these issues. Legal aid is going to be more important than ever. You can't really rely on the federal government, as John and Marie-Claire mentioned, to kind of enforce these rights that we fought so hard to create in law.
Another point to make in the article, actually, we don't have it as a freestanding sort of agenda, although we could have, but we sort of as a preface say, none of this is really going to work if the federal government doesn't continue and the state governments don't continue to make investments in civil legal aid. So, I mean, as a part of sort of across the board here, I think it's very important if there's going to be a serious effort to address poverty and equal justice that we all, coordinate with our friends at NLADA and the ABA in the fight to make sure that the investments in civil legal services continue. And then that the practitioners engage across the board on these efforts to win progress in the fight against poverty.
Thank you. So we've heard from a lot of people watching across the country. We've heard from Roberta in Georgia, Samantha just down the road from me in Nashville, folks in DC and San Francisco. Thank you all for tuning in. I do want to turn to the points that you laid out in the article. Now, we won't have time in our short time together today to go through those point by point, but I want to give each of you a chance to talk about one or two of them, or even if you see a theme that runs throughout that you would like to talk about today. Marie-Claire, I'll start with you.
I think, this is sort of similar to what John said just now, is that a lot of we continue our vigilance against the federal government and what may come out of there. But increasingly, we are looking towards state and localities to see what kind of leadership that they can provide. I'm in California, so our state government is very much wanting to lead the charge in this. And I think we have a lot of similar states and also localities, some that really want to take on some of these issues. And in this respect, working at the local and state levels, we have a lot of partners through our LIN network, our Legal Impact Network, and a lot of partners through our Racial Justice Training Institute that do have the capacity to sort of bring a lot of these issues to light and see what progress can be made at those levels. And it's not anything radically new, because I think the localities and states are often the laboratories for a lot of these progressive policies that go forth. But it's just a more emphasis on that. And I think that's one thing that comes out in the article, is that, this need to work at maybe a more local level, and then maybe use the momentum of different campaigns to sort of elevate it and show how they can work.
Right. John or Andrew, one of you like to talk about any of the specific points that you bring up for the new agenda in the article?
Yeah, I guess it's more of a theme. I think there's going to be some difficult things coming down from Washington probably, and they're most likely going to come to the states as an array of options. One sort of small slice of those options might even be opportunities to improve things, but most of them will be sort of varying degrees of harm. But it'll make an immense difference how these things are implemented at the state level. And one of the reasons to have a whole agenda like this is to keep ourselves vigilant for opportunities. Even when one major area might be suffering, embedded in it might be opportunities to make progress in other areas. The example that comes to my mind is in welfare reform a couple decades ago, which, by all accounts, or by all honest accounts, was pretty much a disaster for the cash assistance for children and families. And yet embedded in that was the means to de-link cash assistance to Medicaid. And in the states where that was taken advantage of aggressively, there were millions and millions of working families added to Medicaid rolls in the years after the implementation of welfare reform. So being alert to things like that, actually throughout the whole 20 years since welfare reform, there's also been pretty steady progress on improvement in the child support enforcement. So again, even as we play defense on parts of it, we'll find opportunities to make progress if we're alert to those possibilities. I'd say one of the main sort of enemies here, or problems that we have to deal with, is that we can't give in to sort of conventional wisdom that makes us defeatist and cynical. Right? There's going to be some setbacks, but we're in a time where the work we do, is more important than ever. And so we have to stay alert across the range of issues and take advantage of these opportunities when they come, even as we play as intense a defense as we can on those main, the main efforts that are coming, like block grants and so on, which are complete disaster.
Yeah, and I think the Shriver Center would say absolutely the Obama administration could have done more on, say, the public sector.
Andrew, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. I think the mic is having trouble switching between the two of you. So if you could get right up on it, it'd help. Thank you.
I'll box John out.
That's right.
So I think we would say there could have been more done on public benefits issues in the Obama administration. Certainly shoring up TANF or the patchwork of programs we have to support early childhood. On the other hand, we have a much more responsive, robust safety net when you look at SNAP, unemployment insurance, Medicaid, the Affordable Care Act. And the question for us and for the country, is this a start of a more responsive, robust safety net for families and kids and people who are unable to work? Or are we going to kind of fall back on demonizing these families and the kind of senseless cuts and really punitive policy choices that characterized, frankly, Democratic and Republican administrations before President Obama took office? And you look at the scale of some of these programs. I'll just use SNAP because I work on public benefits issues. I mean, 45 million Americans receive food stamps. It's a meager benefit. The average household benefit is about $250. It's certainly not enough to help with housing or other basic needs, and it's certainly not enough to be a work disincentive. But this is a program, it's kind of the universal last thread of the safety net. Ex-prisoners, rural Americans, veterans, foster kids aging out of the foster care system. And, the threats that we're seeing on the SNAP front could really undermine the program and set it on a kind of a path of extinction. And states would have a hell of a time trying to make up for that lost federal effort. So I really think we are at a turning point on the public benefits. And it's a question of whether we're going to kind of continue to strengthen these federal programs or we're going to scale back. And I do think on the public benefits issues, it's going to be hard for states to make up some of that ground, especially on the block.
And I think there's also maybe some areas of opportunity, certainly areas of need in particular populations, such as young men and boys in African-American communities, been the subject to decades of disinvestment and, with deep problems and dubious futures. And there's so much we can do across a range of issues in the education system, in the criminal justice system, in the jobs and opportunities area, that there's I think progress to be made by honing in the focus on particular populations of need in addition to subject matter.
Thank you. I want to remind everyone we'd love to hear your questions. We've had some comments come in. We had one come from Kim from Buffalo. She says she teaches at the law school and in clinics, and she says finding and defending resources is going to be essential to increase capacity and ensure access to justice and basic human rights. If you have something you'd like to share with us or a question for the panel, please let us know. You can use the live chat feature in YouTube or email me at Amanda Moore, M-O-O-R-E, at povertylaw.org. I want to turn to the question that you pose in the title of your article, which is, now what? We've been talking about some ideas and pointing out some issues, but what do we actually do now? Andrew, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about what we're doing on the SNAP here at the Shriver Center. So, on Monday, we sent a letter to our entire Illinois congressional delegation, the 2 senators, and then the 18 members of the House of Representatives, a signed letter from 127 organizations urging them to protect the federal food and nutrition programs, including SNAP, but also WIC, school lunch and school breakfast programs for senior citizens to make sure that they don't deal with hunger and food insecurity. And I was really impressed by the number of organizations and the types of organizations that signed on. Obviously you'd expect maybe the food pantries, but we also got the Illinois Association of School Social Workers, groups that look after the rights of elderly Illinois residents and Illinois citizens. And this was kind of the opening gambit for us. We're also going to write a similar letter to Governor Rauner, and we're kind of building a state-based coalition to defend these programs. And we have other actions planned on that front. So I think, just trying to get people mobilized, getting people informed about some of the specific threats, but also, telling the important proactive, protective story about how these programs, help kids. It helps kids as early as in utero if their moms are receiving food stamps.
Yeah, I think part of that also, this is much more of a global issue, I think. But I think messaging is also something that is going to be important in the next few years, because we do a lot of great policy work and we do a lot of really good things, but sometimes the message isn't getting out there. And how we do that, I think, is difficult sometimes. If you're in a legal aid office, you're just trying to get your cases done, and just there's a lot of stuff going on. But I think, one very broad thing is just thinking about what kind of messages do we want to put out there? I feel like, Shriver Center, we've been sort of thinking about that a lot more. What are the messages we put out there, and these positive messages? So like Andrew's talking about, everything related to the SNAP program, how do we sort of get that message out there in a way that people can understand, to sort of counteract what the usual narrative, I think, in this area.
So that feeds up to a sort of a bigger theme here about what we can actually do, and that is to make sure we get connected to the specialists that we can relate to. So, for example, on messaging, Voices for Civil Justice has wonderful messaging, particularly on legal aid. The Opportunity Agenda, Center for American Progress, frameworks. These are all places that have excellent messaging advice. And in particular campaigns, it's essential for all of us to stay on message, even when we're doing cases. Networking with our colleagues on the subject matters, health law program, employment law, national employment law program, housing project, and so on, all the subject matter friends we have, to make sure we're sharing information, make sure we're taking advantage of other people's victories to build momentum. We have our own networks. The Legal Impact Network is state-focused law and policy groups, Racial Justice Network. So I think that's an extremely important piece of advice, is that we stay in touch, that we parlay the victories we get into more victories, and that we copy each other and make good use of the things that are important forward.
Right. I will say, you mentioned the Opportunity Agenda. I know we have some folks watching who are from the Opportunity Agenda, so I'm glad they've joined us, and they get a bonus shout out that they weren't even expecting. So your advice on steps was really good, and especially with the networking, and it kind of leads into a question that we received from Victoria, who asked if we had a second to address steps that LSC funded, that's Legal Services Corporation funded organizations could take in particular. She'd be grateful to hear that. So I think some of the steps you laid out apply to that, but if you could address that specific piece of our audience, which is a large piece of our audience, that'd be great.
I said a few things earlier about what a large slice of this work that's in front of us here is individual representation. So there's a lot to do that's completely within, the rules governing the use of LSC funds. So in civil rights, in the use of criminal records, in remedies under the Violence Against Women Act and so forth. And there's no problem. In fact, it's fully consistent with the ABA standards for practice to be in touch with best practices, to connect with networks of practitioners, to learn from each other, to how to get the best possible outcomes in those individual cases, and how to cite each other's work in getting better outcomes for clients. So I think there's a ton of work to do here, both just through individual representation, strategic selection of case handling priorities, that fit in with the national trends of where the needs are, and to stay in touch with best practices. And on LSC itself, I think the word there is to coordinate and take the lead from our NLADA and the ABA and the others who are active in that specific fight, which to this moment I think remains a theoretical fight. We haven't seen any specific proposal yet to do anything to LSC funding, although it's certainly rumored.
Yeah, I think networks, like John says, networks are going to be really important and really broad-based networks. So it's connecting with other LSC organizations, and also connecting with your state law and policy organization, with some of the national organizations that are starting to get maybe more resources to help with some of the impact litigation. So there's broad base. So again, with the criminal records work, we have been trying to get together to do this work. Legal services, fair housing organizations, national civil rights organizations, and each of those people, each of those organizations brings in something different. And because we're able to sort of make those connections, one LSC person who can't necessarily take on the big case can sort of like partner up with somebody else. And so we're trying to do that a lot more in the criminal records area. And I think those are the type of part of the networks that are really going to make things move forward, I think, in the upcoming years.
Thank you. We have reached the end of our time, it always goes by so quickly. We did have one question come in about what the racial justice network is that John mentioned, and I will get to that in just a moment. That's the Racial Justice Training Institute that the Shriver Center runs every year. And I have a little information about that to share with you. First, I want to thank my three guests today. Thank you, John and Andrew, joining us from Chicago.
Thanks for having us.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Marie-Claire, joining us from Los Angeles.
Thanks, Amanda.
And thanks to all of you for joining us. And now I'll share with you to answer the question that was asked about the Racial Justice Training Institute. For starters, I want to remind you all that you can read the article, Now What? Poverty Fighting Ideas for Another New Administration. You can find that at povertylaw.org/clearinghouse. And the article goes into much more detail than we were able to get to today, both about assessing the past 8 years and about specific points of an agenda for the next years. And then I'll also invite you, if this is something that you are interested in, you can find ongoing thoughts from our advocates at the Shriver Center about how poverty and race issues are affected by the transition, also about President Trump's nominees for his cabinet. You can find a lot of that at our blog, The Shriver Brief, which can be found at theshriverbrief.org. And here's the answer to the question that came in. If you're excited about these issues and you're looking to expand your own practice to include a racial justice lens, we invite you to apply for the Shriver Center's 2017 Racial Justice Training Institute. In fact, Marie-Claire went through the Institute last year. You can find more information and the application when you're on the Clearinghouse community site. So when you're on there looking for the article, also look for the training programs block on the main page, and that will link you to more information and the application for what we call RJTI. I also want to invite everyone to join us for next month's Advocacy Exchange. I'll be joined by Kate Lang. She's a senior staff attorney at Justice and Aging, and we'll talk about the topic of next month's Clearinghouse article, which is the basics of Social Security and SSI. So this will be a great one for new attorneys or attorneys who don't specialize in public benefits but want to know more about the basics of a couple of major programs, how they're similar and how they are different. That will be on Wednesday, February 15th at 1 o'clock Eastern, 10 o'clock Pacific, same time as today. And as I mentioned, there will be a link to register for that when you get the follow-up email that will come and link you to the recording of today's broadcast, as well as to John, Andrew, and Marie-Claire's article. So I hope you'll be able to join us next month. Thank you again for joining us today. And remember now more than ever, you are not alone at